O cap'n, my cap'n, our fearful trip is done.
Caleb, this is unforgivable. I'm not gay, by the way, totally not.
The ship has weathered every rack. The prize we sought is won. Whoa! The port is near. The bells I hear. The people all exulting.
What the fuck?
While follow eyes, the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring.
Did somebody say bear around here?
O captain, my captain, rise up and hear the bells.
Caleb, what did I tell you about having your own opinion?
Rise up! For you the flag is flung. For you the bugle trills.
You ungrateful bastard. My great-granddaddy died to keep these slaves here.
For you, bouquets and ribbon wraiths. Bruh. For you, the shores are crowding. For you, they call amongst the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic in which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As for you, Caleb, dear captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head, it is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. Amen. Mosamallah. Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be looking at the start bench recommendations in the free agency advice video. Before we kick things off, Toxic, Big Yawners, Mr. Steeler Girl, Karen's husband, and Rictatorship. I don't actually have any advice for the 5 of you this week. I'm also not going to be going into depth about B-Dogs. I think it's kind of a waste of time, especially since he's yet to set his team. If he starts setting his team, I'll probably start giving him advice again. But for now, I'm not going to include it in the video because it's a waste of my time, a waste of your guys' time watching. So I'll just skip over that. Anyway, we'll kick things off with Pussy. With Pussy, I actually recommend that you start Russell Wilson and bench Will Levis. Now, here's the thing. Maybe Will Levis has a lot higher of an upside. Sure, you could even say he might have a better matchup. Whatever you want to say, either way. I definitely don't think I would start Will Levis this week. If you're Pussy, you're in a position where you're pretty relaxed and you know you're going to be making the playoffs. You know you're probably going to have that 1 seed. So for now, I would keep Will Levis on your bench, and I would start a guy like Russell Wilson who has that consistency, and you know he's probably going to at least be somewhat consistent for you, regardless of the matchup. You've seen it with Buffalo. You've seen it with Kansas City, Green Bay, the Jets, where he's able to go out there against some of the better defenses in the league against the pass and still go out there and have around 15 to 20 points. While with Will Levis, this is going to be his, I think, 4th NFL game now, and the Jaguars' pass defense is no slouch, even though it says they've given up the second most to quarterbacks. Even as you saw with Tampa Bay, for example, a defense that has given up quite a few points to quarterbacks this season, you still see that Will Levis is kind of struggling out there. He is still a new quarterback. Their offensive line sucks. Derrick Henry wasn't really able to get much going in this last week specifically. But overall, I do think I would definitely recommend starting Russell Wilson, just because you're in a position where you don't need to take any shots for now. I'd say let Will Levis ride your bench. If you think you're impressed with him come maybe playoff time or in a future matchup, go with him then. For now, I'd just take it safe so that way you don't take any stupid losses you don't want to take. So I would definitely recommend sticking with Russ. Also, if you're Pussy, I recommend that you start DeAndre Swift and that you bench DeAndre Hopkins. Now, it's kind of the same situation where DeAndre Hopkins does have a lot higher upside than DeAndre Swift. And he's had a few games where he's shown it off, whether it was against the Colts or whether it was against the Falcons. He has had a few of those games where he has shown it off, but it's the same situation. You might trap yourself and barely get anything. He probably will have at least around 5 to 7 points, even on a bad game. But still, I do think you want to be safer here, and you want to go with your guy like, say, DeAndre Swift, who all season has, except for weeks 1 where he barely played and the week against Dallas, who's one of the best defenses in the last decade, has scored at least 10 points in every single game. He's looked fantastic. He's looked fantastic. And overall, it's a very similar situation. DeAndre Hopkins absolutely has higher upside. However, I do think if you're pussy, it's wise at this point in time in the season to just start playing your cards safe and just trying to figure out what you're going to use in upcoming weeks. I don't think you need to take any unnecessary shots, or I think you could end up losing a few, maybe not a few games, but you might end up losing a game you should have easily won. So if you're pussy, I'm taking your, if I were, oh, Jesus Christ, I cannot talk right now. But anyway, if I'm pussy, I'm taking my time and looking at these players and figuring out what I'm going to do come playoffs. I'm not going to start taking my shots now. I would take the guys who you're taking your shots with and keep them on the bench and see what they end up doing and then kind of going from there. But I wouldn't just go gung ho and start these people, not yet anyway. And I would definitely go with Swift and uh, Russell Wilson over Will Levis and DeAndre Hopkins just because I don't trust it yet. Um, then we'll go ahead and look at MILF. Now, with MILF, I actually recommend, when it comes to MILF, I recommend that he starts Seattle's team defense and benches New York. Because here's the thing, I know Buffalo's offense has been struggling over these past few weeks. However, I don't think that they're gonna do very well against Buffalo overall, just because Buffalo does have an insanely powerful offense and could just decide to drop 40 points on the Jets for no reason if they really wanted to. Now, don't get me wrong, the Seahawks also play the Rams, who is a pretty powerful offense in themselves when they're healthy. What I mean by that is the Rams are going to be without their starting right guard. They're going to be playing with Matthew Stafford, who I don't know how well he can actually throw the ball, but he is going to be playing through a hand injury on his throwing hand, which usually doesn't go very well, at least in the first game back. On top of that, they're going to have Puka Nakua, who's going to be playing through an injury himself. They're also going to be missing Kyron Williams for yet another week. Overall, I do think this is a much more favorable matchup than the Seahawks. I just think that 9 times out of 10 in a situation like this, the Seahawks probably will outscore the Jets here. Um, then we'll look at. I will recommend you start Grant Delpit and bench. I don't even know how to pronounce this guy's name. Chad Muma. Yeah, I guess that's it. Chad Muma. I've never even heard of this guy. Well, I have, but he never really did anything. Um, Either way, I recommend you start Grant Delpit because he's been a consistent at least 10 points for you all season outside of weeks 3 and 4. He's one of the better DB options you can get in all of fantasy. And on top of that, he is a pretty consistent option overall. While with Chad Muma, I'm not going to lie, I'm not sure what you were thinking when you were picking him up because he's done literally nothing all season. And overall, I do think Grant Delpit is almost promised to get more points than Chad Muma here. Um, Last week I recommended you. Oh, by the way, with Pussy, last week I didn't have any recommendations for you. That's why I didn't really talk about that. Um, Last week with MILF, I recommended he started Rudy Ford and that he benched Shaquille Leonard if Zaire Franklin played, and that's exactly what ended up happening. Is Zaire Franklin actually did play? So what ended up happening out of that is Shaquille Leonard only had 11 points, while Rudy Ford ended up actually having 17. So that would have earned him a positive of 6 points. Then I also recommended that he started Grant Delpit and bench Jason Pinnock. Now, Grant Delpit is a very consistent, very good option. He's known for being consistent, but he doesn't always have insanely high upside games. Jason Pinnock has been known a few times this season to have a really big game. And my reason I keep saying to bench him is because you cannot trust a guy like Jason Pinnock. And he's only had good games in about a quarter of the games this season, if you're being generous. Um, and yeah, I overall just don't think he's very good. I don't think he's very worth it. I would definitely go with the consistency side of things every week if you're MILF. Usually I'm right. This previous week I ended up being wrong on it. He got 16 points against Dallas, while Grant Delpit only had 15. So this would have lost you a point if you would have listened to that. However, if you would have listened to both of my suggestions, you would have earned a net positive of 5 additional points. So take it or leave it. It's only 1 point off. I'd still give the same recommendation week in and week out for MILF when it comes to these DBs, except for this specific week. I actually think there's somebody worse than Jason Pinnock, and that being Chad Muma, who has no upside, no anything. So I would definitely go with Grant Delpit. Now, obviously, this is all assuming Rudy Ford would actually play. He's considered doubtful right now. So you might end up just throwing Delpit in anyway. But either way, that would be my suggestion if you're MILF. Um, then we'll move on to Booty Basher. Booty Basher's team's looking a little bit different here after some trades with Pussy. To kick things off, I recommend that he starts. He actually doesn't have a tight end to start. I was about to say to start a tight end, but yeah, even Gerald Everett's out, so Booty's going to be without a tight end this week, I guess. Um, I recommend that you do start Jacoby Myers and that you start Brian Robinson at the flex and the wide receiver position, respectively. There's really nobody you can bench there. I also recommend that you start Josh Metellus at your D spot, and I recommend that you start Bryce Huff and bench Daryl Taylor. Now, Bryce Huff is not a great option. I'll be the very, very first to admit that Bryce Huff probably isn't a good option. He has a few weeks in a row where he had sacks, but Daryl Taylor has just done literally nothing this season. He had three okay weeks. Other than that, he's literally just scored 0 points in like every week. At least with Bryce Huff, you have a realistic expectation of him potentially getting sacks and just doing better overall. So that's why I ended up going with Bryce Huff over Taylor. I think that there's about a 90% chance Daryl Taylor gets outplayed by Bryce Huff this week, even if Bryce Huff isn't a great option and he's very inconsistent. At least he does have points upside. Then last week with Booty Basher, I recommended that you started Gerald Everett um and benched your tight end you had there. I don't think you actually had anyone there. And the funny thing about that is Gerald Everett actually didn't score a single point, so that didn't really affect anything. I also recommended that he started Debo and benched Gabe Davis, so he started Debo Samuel and benched Gabriel Davis. This would have earned him a total of, well, kicking things off, Gabe Davis ended up having 11.6, um, while Debo Samuel ended up having 15.9. So if you do the math there, that's a good few points, 4.3. I also recommended he started Christian McCaffrey and bench Tua because Tua was on a bye week. This would have earned him another 20.2 points. So this would have pushed him up to, I believe, this would have pushed him up to 27, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's 27 point. I'm not doing math right now. But anyway, then I also recommended that he started D Hop and benched DeAndre Swift for last week. This would have earned him another additional 5.7 points because D Hop actually played and Swift did not. Those are actually people in possession of Pussy's team now. I also recommended you started Derrick Henry and benched Latavius Murray, and for the first time ever this season, this lost you 11 points if you would have listened to that because Latavius Murray actually scored 14.9. Derrick Henry scored 3 points. But if you listen to all of the advice I recommended to you overall, you still would have gained an additional 26.30 points. Doing the math in my head, I finally thought about it whenever I was coming up with what I was talking about here. But overall, it would have helped you out for 20 points if you would have listened. Um, then we will go right ahead and move on to Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled. Because, like I said, Toxic and Big Yawners don't have anyone that I actually have any recommendations for. Neither does Mr. Steeler Girl, and neither does Karen, actually. But either way, we'll look at Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled. With Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled this week, I only have one recommendation for you, and that's that you start a Landon Roberts and that you bench Jack Campbell. Now, if you're Evan, please stop looking at projections, dude. I don't know if you're looking at projections, just not checking actual stats on the year, what the problem is, but Jack Campbell has done fucking nothing this season. He's been getting a few games where he was okay, had one good game week 2, and immediately started just splitting snaps at best. So he's literally doing almost nothing. While you actually made a really good move upon the injury of Cool Holcomb and you picked up a Landon Roberts, who literally has outscored Jack Campbell in 3 weeks. If you're Evan, I don't know how you could possibly look at these last 4 weeks alone and say that you shouldn't start him. He's been doing really good since Cool Holcomb got hurt. He's probably going to continue that. If you're scrambled, you got an absolute steal here. Go ahead and use him. Last week, I recommended that he started Terrell Bernard and benched Pete Werner. If he would have listened, Terrell Bernard got 25.5. Pete Werner ended up getting 12. So this would have earned him 13.5 points. And yet again, we are perfect on the picks overall. I know there aren't too many people that got recommendations for this specific week, but there were a lot of bye weeks, a lot of injuries. So I just really didn't have much to offer for you guys for this specific week. But either way, we will get into the free agency advice like we always do. And kicking things off with the quarterback room, things are looking kind of bleak here, but there's two recommendations I have, and you can just look at it by looking at the projections. The number one recommendation I would have is Taylor Heineke because he's had experience in the NFL. He has actually had some upside over these past few games, although he's dealing with an injury right now. I don't know for sure if he will play starting in week 12 or if he won't. We'll just have to wait and see. But at least he is a quarterback that, in theory, should be starting, which is better than you can say about anyone else here. Jake Browning for the Bengals. If anybody's ever watched this guy, they will want to just not watch football ever again. This guy fucking sucks. He has really good wide receivers around him. That's about where the upside ends, though. And other than that, yeah, he just fucking sucks overall. So those are my two QB recommendations, and don't worry, we will get to the pick of the week. Um, Next up, we'll look at the running backs, though. With the running backs, the first guy I'd recommend is actually Darrell Henderson, just for this specific week, not in the future or anything like that. Um, with Darrell Henderson, I recommend him because he at least is going to be getting the majority of the starting snaps. Like I said, Matthew Stafford's going to be playing through a hand injury. You got Puka, who's going to be coming back off an injury. I cannot see this Rams team trying to pass the ball that much. I do think this will be a very Darrell Henderson reliable day. I think this will be a pretty good week for him specifically. So if you need a running back for this specific week, go out there and grab Darrell Henderson. He's probably the best option you can get. Um, then if I had to pick anyone else, I don't think there was any other good options out there because the free agency thing is getting, or the free agency list is starting to get a little bare. But either way, looking at Ezekiel Elliott, Ramondre Stevenson, whenever he returns in week 12, will be probably coming back from an injury. And even if he doesn't, at least Ezekiel Elliott is getting some touches on the ball. He's getting occasional touchdowns. He's getting a few targets. He's pretty much getting at least opportunities, which is more than I can say for almost everyone else on this list, with the exception of Tyler Algier, except for the fact that Tyler Algier now has to deal with not just Bijan Robinson, but he also has to deal with Cordero Patterson. Um, on top of that, Tyler Algier has just been playing like shit this season, so it's very hard to trust him overall. I would much prefer Ezekiel Elliott out of the guys on this list. But other than Darrell Henderson this specific week, I think if you're in a position where you need to start it, one of these guys you're probably going to lose, unfortunately. But either way, let's look at the wide receivers here. Um, and now Pussy actually picked this guy up, and Mr. Steeler Girl actually made the recommendation to this guy when it comes to pick of the week. Now, this is a very, very good pick of the week. I'm not going to lie, this isn't the pick of the week that I chose, but it has a very strong argument for it. And I would say that you're not even completely in the wrong for suggesting that he would deserve pick of the week over my guy. But either way, this guy is going to be the new wide receiver 3 for Houston. They're probably going to be weaning Robert Woods down to a wide receiver 4 role, meaning that Noah Brown will probably go in there and have a better season than Robert Woods for the rest of the season. And for these last two games where he was in there, 6 for 153, 7 for 152. He has the insane upside of of CJ Stroud going in there and just balling his ass off. Now, this is a very good looking guy over the past 2 weeks. He's actually looked pretty solid since he came back. You'll get no argument out of me. However, and this is the reason I ended up sticking with my guy instead of choosing this guy. First of all, you'll have the return of Dameon Pierce for this Houston offense, so naturally they're going to be running the ball more, meaning they're not going to get as much volume to Noah Brown to kick things off. On top of that, they're also going to be hopefully getting their healthy receiving core back, whether that's Nico Collins, Tank Dell. Tank Dell's been healthy for a few weeks, but not so much Nico Collins and Robert Woods. I do think the return of these guys will, at bare minimum, hurt this guy's workload, and we'll have to see how much it affects it. We can only wait and see. But I will warn you, I don't think this is going to be a consistent thing every single week where he's going out there and putting up 30 points. But for what it's worth, he's definitely better than everything else when it comes to this wide receiver core or free agency for wide receivers. The other guy I'd actually recommend is Michael Wilson for the Cardinals. Now, with Michael Wilson, he is injured, so I wouldn't recommend going in there and just starting him this week. But look at that schedule whenever you get to the end of the season to kick things off. That is a very, very friendly schedule. He has the return of Kyler Murray, so naturally he's probably going to be doing even better than he did at the beginning of the season. On top of that, he has actually looked pretty solid throughout most of the games. He's been a bit inconsistent, to say the least. but at least he is out there and he seems like a way better option than a lot of these guys that are on free agency at this time. And yeah, he's actually looking like he has some good upside. He has the return of Kyler Murray. He might be coming back from the injury. James Conner might take a lot of the attention off of him, and that schedule is looking very good. Keep an eye on this guy. I know Pussy already took Rondale Moore. This Rondale Moore would have actually been the second recommendation I had here at the wide receiver room, but he already took him. But I do think Michael Wilson will be a solid option as well for the same exact reasons as Rondale Moore, except Rondale Moore is probably going to be a bit more stable. We'll just have to find out though. Um, then we'll look at the tight end room, and this is going to be a very rare instance where I actually have two players on the exact same team because the tight ends in fantasy on the free agency list fucking suck. To kick things off, you have Kyle Pitts, and I think he's probably the best option you can get because at least he's somewhat consistent to get you at least 4 points, which is more than I can say for anyone else, including guys like, say, Tyler Conklin. I know there was a recommendation for Tyler Conklin to be the best player on all of free agency. Um, but the problem is, even guys like Tyler Conklin have scored absolutely nothing in some weeks. Overall, I would much prefer to have a guy like Kyle Pitts who at least has some upside, can have those occasional good games, and occasionally can actually crack 10 points by some miracle of Jesus. Um, and then it's the same story with Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith is very inconsistent, but at least he does have some really good upside. Has had a somewhat decent level of consistencies from week 2 to 7. He also had a good week against Minnesota. But I do think it's going to come down to if one of these two can actually be good. I think these two have the highest consistency, or not consistency, upside out of anybody on free agency. And I will just do this as a bonus. I'll talk about Tyler Conklin and why he might be good. I don't think he'll be as good as the other two, but this is why he's doing better. With the loss of running back Michael Carter, you're starting to see more targets and checkdowns for guys like, say, Tyler Conklin, which is helping him out a lot. The reason I don't like it though is you have already gotten reports confirming that Dalvin Cook is supposed to start getting more catches and touches on the ball. So I do think this is naturally going to go down at least a little bit. On top of that, if they end up being continuing to be a run-heavy offense, I can't see Tyler Conklin being nearly as good as he's been these past 2 weeks. But we'll just have to wait and see. Plus, he's just straight up had weeks where he scored nothing. So I just don't think I could actually put him any higher. Um, then we'll look at kickers, and I'm going to try to graze through kickers because it's very hard to predict what the hell kickers are going to do. First of all, Jake Elliott, he's been one of the top scoring kickers in all of fantasy. His only bad part is that over these past 3 weeks he's played, he hasn't been great, or past 4 weeks he's played, he hasn't been great. But if he can reach that first 4 weeks upside, he could do fucking fantastic. Um, then I also recommend Jason Myers. Jason Myers, I'm recommending him not because he's the most consistent guy in the world, but because for a kicker, his upside is kind of ridiculous. And if you're in a position where, say, you're Karen's husband or you're Milford, you're anybody who's in a matchup that's not looking too favorable for you, the running back room is actually the one of the better spots you can actually go and make up some points. Because here's the thing, kickers, as you know, usually don't score a lot of points, even if you have one of the more consistent guys. But if you're able to go out there and say your opponent puts up 10 points when it comes to his kicking room, and you know you're probably going to lose, and you go out there and you start a kicker, and the kicker gets 30 points, that's 20 points in your favor right there. Sometimes kickers are the best opportunity you have to take shots. So if you're in a position where you need to take shots to even function at this point, I would recommend a guy like Jason Sanders overall, or Jason Myers overall. Um, then we'll look at the defense. For this, I tried to look at defenses that have both scored a decent amount of points this season and have a friendly schedule. And the number one option I found was the Minnesota Vikings. Um, the Vikings defense isn't that great in real life. They're nothing special. Um, but they do have guys that make their defense actually seem pretty solid in fantasy. They got their Cameron Bynums. They have Harrison Smith. They have their Danielle Hunters. They have at least some pieces that can make this defense score points. Um, and they do have a very, very friendly schedule for the next 4 weeks at least. Because now I know Darth isn't going to like me saying this, but with the Bengals using Jake Browning, they're probably not going to be too good in terms of offense. They play the Bears, who fucking suck. They play the Vikings, not the Vikings, the Raiders, who fucking suck. They play the Broncos, who haven't been that horrible, but it really hasn't been good since the beginning of the season overall. And the Broncos still don't know what the hell they're trying to do, but it's a very, very friendly schedule up until week 16. And if you're in a position like, say, you're Mr. Steeler Girl, say you're scrambled and wiggle waggled, you're in a position where you need to win these games, and this is the type of defense you want in those upcoming weeks. And the number 2 defense I'd recommend is going to be Detroit. Um, with Detroit, they've had some very bad weeks and they've had some very good weeks. They're very inconsistent, but with Detroit, the upside is you can usually actually predict when the consistencies are going to happen or when they're going to have good weeks. Obviously, they had their bad week against Seattle, they had their bad week against Kansas City, their bad week against Baltimore, bad week against the Chargers. They're going to have their bad weeks against very tough teams. That's what defenses do, and maybe the Lions don't have the best defense in the world, right? But you can look at their points against bad teams, like say your Raiders, your Falcons, hell, even the Packers. You can actually look and see when these schedule or bad teams are going to be played against, and you can see that the Lions are probably going to go out there and have a pretty solid game. Like for example, they have the Bears twice, they have the Broncos, and they have quite a few good matchups here in between now and the playoffs that I think you guys can end up using, especially for this week against the Bears, who are going to be using Justin Fields, who's going to be returning from an injury. They're going to be using 3 running backs that are all dealing with injuries right now. Khalil Herbert. They're going to be using Roshan Johnson dealing with an injury too. Pretty much all of their running backs are dealing with injuries, and the Bears are just beat to hell and back right now. So I do think it'll be a good Detroit game specifically. And I would definitely take these 2 defenses over the rest. I'm not the biggest fan of these 2 defenses overall, but for what's on free agency, I do think they're by far the best options. Um, then we'll look at the DB spot, and this is where we're actually going to announce our pick of the week, fellas. Keyshawn Nixon. Now, I know you guys might be fucking slamming your head against your phone. You're like, who the fuck is this guy? What's this guy going to do? Why is he the pick of the week? Um, and now you might not see too much impressive when it comes to his points, especially at the beginning of the season here. But there's something that this guy is known for, and that is his kick returns. He's a cornerback, or aka a DB for fantasy here, especially in leagues. If you have him in a league where there's a cornerback position, this guy is especially deadly. He gets the return upside, and if you guys haven't really noticed a trend here, whenever the Packers play against teams that have a really good offense, say the Lions, for example, where you got 150 kick return yards, say your Rams or the Steelers, who had a really good day, maybe not a really good day on offense, but kicked quite a few field goals, which allowed him to get a lot of kick returns, where he had 151 and 66, 68 the week before, right? Where he's able to go out there and score a lot of points. On top of that, the Packers have actually upgraded him to being a starting corner from these or for these upcoming weeks, probably for the rest of the season, which means he's also going to have some tackle solo upside. He's going to be pretty much a regular corner that maybe not won't have the best upside when it comes to DBs. But I will warn you, you know how I just said that he's going to have really good upside whenever you see him against, say, really good teams with really good offenses? Look at that schedule coming up. He's going to have the Chargers, the Lions, the Chiefs, the Giants is going to suck, the Buccaneers, and then the Vikings at the end of the season. This guy is going to blow up. You guys will just watch. Even if you don't think so for now. I know this is going to sound fucking whack to a lot of you guys, like I said. But at least as of last season, I actually lost a fantasy championship that I had an 80% chance of winning because somebody played this guy against me. This is another situation where if you're, say, you're MILF, you're scrambled and wiggle-waggled, where you need to take your shots against certain teams, this is how you do it. And I've seen this guy put up so much as over 70 fantasy points in one game. The upside is fucking ridiculous for this guy. Like I said, it may seem crazy, but just wait and see whenever he starts playing against teams that have those better offenses that score more points. Because all season, the Packers really haven't played games where the other team scored many points. And I think you're going to start seeing it at the ending of the season, how much upside this guy has. He's had around 15 points for 3 weeks in a row, and I think it'll only continue. Imagine a week where he's able to get all those return yards, plus tackles, and maybe even a return touchdown. The guy can be fucking insane. Then the next DB I would recommend is going to be Xavier McKinney. By the way, nobody actually picked that guy. I didn't think anyone would. So there's unfortunately no winner for this specific week. But either way, then we have Xavier McKinney when it comes to my second option. I think this guy's going to be a bit more consistent than, say, your Keyshawn Nixon. But he's probably the best option you have when it comes to consistency. He's not going to go out there and put up 70 points as a DB or anything crazy like that. But he's probably the best option you have. He's getting a lot of tackles. He's going out there and he's making good plays overall. And the Giants just don't have an offense, meaning he's been staying on the field for a lot more often than he has for most of the season. Overall, probably the best option you have when it comes to these DBs. Then we'll look at the defensive line, and this is where I actually struggled. The defensive line fucking sucks when it comes to free agency. You can't find anybody that's actually consistent. Uh, to kick things off, Derek Brown. This isn't the number one guy. This is the number two guy I'd recommend, but he's just right there, so I'll show him to you now. Has had 3 weeks in a row of relative consistency. He is going to be playing against the Cowboys, who do give up quite a few fantasy points to defensive tackles specifically, and the reason for that is because they have a very good offensive line and an offensive line that's usually very good against um, edge rushers, usually, unless it's Khalil Mack bullying Tyron Smith. And there is a 50-50 this week whether Zach Martin is going to be taking Derek Brown or if Zach Martin is going to be taking somebody else. My guess is Zach Martin is going to be helping against Brian Burns or Frankie Louvu in this upcoming game specifically. So I do think that this will be a very good week for Derek Brown, and I do think he probably has more consistency than most of the other guys on this list. And the number one guy I'd actually recommend is Vita Vea. Um, Vita Vea did miss a few weeks or a week with injury. He also had that bye week, and he did have the 2 bad weeks. But you can look at all these weeks where he's put up at least 10 points plus. He's very consistent. There's no other guy that I could find on the free agency that actually even had any type of consistency, anything close to this. So I do think Vita Vea is by far the best option. And yeah, you can see the difference. Even though Derek Brown has outscored Vita Vea, you can see the clear difference night and day of how much the consistency is there. So if you need a defensive lineman, I'd go Vita Vea. Maybe not this week specifically, though, because they are going against the San Fran offensive line, which will probably be a very bad matchup, but we can only wait and see. I do think that it's going to be a good rest of the season for him, at least overall. And then we'll get into the linebackers. To kick things off, we'll add Demario Davis to the list whenever he comes back off of a bye week. These past 3 weeks, he's had over 20 points in all of them. 4 of the last 5, he had over 20. He had that bad stretch in between week 3, 4, and 7, but he seems like he's had a lot of games where he's put up over 20 points. He seems like a solid linebacker to have. He has sack upside. He's getting a lot of tackles. He's doing everything you could ever ask for a linebacker. And overall, he's looking really good. So if you need a linebacker, he's probably the number one suggestion I'd have. And then the next guy I'd recommend is probably going to be Drew Tranquill. Drew Tranquill, even though he isn't consistent when it comes to how good he can be, he is consistent when it comes to his floor. He's getting at least around 12 points per game, which is a good start off. On top of that, he always has sack upside. He's known for getting quite a few sacks for a linebacker. He's one of the better ones in the league at getting sacks for being a middle linebacker. So keep an eye on him. He could be really good in the weeks coming up. We'll just have to wait and see. So far, he's been a bit of a disappointment, but certainly not bad overall. You can see the points. They speak for itself. Ignore weeks 1 and 2. That was when Nick Bolton was playing all the snaps. But since then, Nick Bolton got hurt, and he's been kind of taking over for most of it. So keep an eye on this guy. He could be really good. But for now, he's just been kind of disappointing. But don't live him out yet overall. He's probably still going to be good for at least 10 points per game if you need a linebacker. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys thought the intro was funny. And I'll catch you guys later.